would be honored if you would join us.
Greetings and welcome to another episode of Film Stories here on the YouTube channel. And today we're talking about the first film of the Coen Brothers, Blood Simple. So in the past I have just begun to scratch the surface of the Coen Brothers, who are two of my favourite directors. We did look at a scene from The Big Lebowski a little while ago, but I thought today we'd go back and look at their very beginnings with just a really quick film story mainly about the way the film was funded. So the story begins with Joel Coen. He's fresh out of film school. He's come out of NYU film school and then on to the University of Texas, where a lot of the ideas and the iconography for Blood Simple would begin to form. Ethan Coen had just majored in philosophy at Princeton, and the two brothers reunited in New York in 1980. And whilst they co-wrote the screenplay for Blood Simple, Ethan was working as a typist in Macy's to pay the bills while the project began to coalesce. The film didn't go through the studio system. And it was an interesting time in Hollywood at that time. We'll get into that in a moment. But they, for various reasons, they elected to go down the independent route. And the film didn't go through the studio system. It was essentially what we now know as crowdfunded. And that's really the interesting part about the story. So the Coens were adamant that they wanted to retain their independence. And again, we'll come to that in a moment, the reasons why. So they approached the funding of the film in a way that we now would recognise as crowdfunding. They went around rattling tins, basically. They pulled up a rich list of the 100 wealthiest local people. They hit it hard. They approached people that they knew, and they were offering investors percentage points in the film. They were selling. If the figures that I've looked at are right, they were selling 1 percentage point in the film for $15,000. And then they reportedly sold half of the film in that manner. So 50% of the film was sold in percentage points to investors. The other half, again, percentage points went to contributors and collaborators. And they funded the film in that manner. I don't know that the aim here was specifically to skirt the studio system, but kind of looking around the story and the history of it, it's quite possible that Joel Coen had experienced co-editing The Evil Dead for Sam Raimi, who'd first met at film school, and they became friends whilst he was co-editing The Evil Dead for Raimi. And he saw how Raimi had used a prototype short film to attract interest for making and funding The Evil Dead as a feature-length movie. And whether that inspired Joel, but that's the method that Coens went with. Also, they and there are crossover links that continue between the Coens and Raimi. The Coens were going to write the screenplay for Crime Wave, which was Raimi's next film. And Bruce Campbell, star of the Evil Dead, of course, the Evil Dead series, he would appear in what became the kind of prototype mock-up trailer for Blood Simple that the Coens used to promote and crowdfund the film. And I'll post a link for that trailer below. Actually, it's worth a watch. The style is very similar. The budget clearly is increased, but the style is very similar to the final product. So in terms of the kind of wider context of perhaps why they felt the need to do this, don't forget that this was 1980. It was around the time when of the huge commercial failure of Heaven's Gate, a film which I'm sure we will come to at some point in the Film Stories episodes, whether here or on Simon's podcast. But it was a film which really marked the decline of studios' big budget, open-ended backing of independent productions. It was a film which commercially failed and was given a lot of leeway by the students, a lot of trust in the kind of the independent production element of it. And the Coens saw the writing on the wall there. They saw that studios were no longer going to simply invest sums of money in independent films without expecting a modicum of creative control. And the Coens, it was their directorial, it was their feature-length debut. It would be Joel's directorial debut because, as I'm sure you're aware, for the first part of their career, Joel was attributed with the director's credit, whereas Ethan was always attributed with the producer credit. But for the Coens to retain full creative control, they decided that self-funding was a must. And so, this is one of the stories, one of those film stories that does have a happy ending. Anyone that did invest in the film made their money back many times over. One of those investors was Barry Sonnenfeld's father. And Barry Sonnenfeld, of course, being the cinematographer turned director who would get his first break shooting Blood Simple for the Coens. He was the cinematographer in that film. And there's a really great article I found in The Guardian from 2017 when he talks about just meeting them at a party. He just bought himself a 16mm camera, and that was enough, apparently, for Joel Coen, who simply said, yep, okay, come work for us. And he would be their cinematographer pretty much up until they began working with Roger Deakins in that kind of middle period of their career. So, in an interesting callback as well to perhaps the first Film Stories podcast that Simon did, Sonnenfeld claims that he threw up 20 times throughout filming, which, if you remember that first podcast, I think it was on the Addams Family, Simon talked about how that seriously didn't change for Sonnenfeld throughout his career. He became renowned for regular nervous vomiting. When the film came out, it didn't test very well at all. But then it scored very big on the festival circuit, and it eventually got picked up for distribution. It's if you haven't seen Blood Simple before, haven't seen it in a while, it's definitely worth a rewatch. It's a very lean film, it's a very stylish film, and whilst it has some flaws, it does show all the promise that you'd expect from a duo that would go on to create one of the most outstanding filmographies in cinema today. Their next film would be the much more commercially successful Raising Arizona with Nicolas Cage, but that is another film story. Don't forget, there's plenty more film stories here on the YouTube channel. Please do like and subscribe to hear more. We also have, of course, Simon's podcast at all good podcast providers. We have the website at filmstories.co.uk, along with the Facebook page, Film Stories Online. But, of course, we have the jewel in our crown as well. Issue 2 of Film Stories, the monthly print magazine, is winging its way to doors pretty much as we speak, and that's an exciting prospect in itself. Don't forget, if you want to get your hands on a copy of Film Stories, the print magazine, you can simply visit the website for more details. That's been me with the dawn of the Coens, and I'll be back at some point soon with another film story, and at some point in the future with another Coens film story. Thanks very much for listening. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.